You're listening to the Hello World Podcast, number 64. My name is Sean Wildermuth, and I'm your host. The Hello World Podcast is where you can hear from some of your favorite developers, authors, and speakers about how they got started in this business and the decisions they made along the way. We go way back to their first computer, their first code experience, and their first job. We've decided not to have a sponsor for the podcast, but if you want to support the podcast and the kinds of things that I do, feel free to visit my Pluralsight courses at seanw.me/psauthor, including my newest course on building a web app with ASP.NET Core RC1. Today's episode is another one that was recorded on our road trip. This is at the Boise Code Camp. And I want to apologize ahead of time because it was a really echoey room, so the sound quality isn't as great as I'd wished. I think you'll still be able to hear Richard's great story. We're going to be starting the second half of the road trip on May 1st. The road trip is covering 25 cities in total in North America and Europe. We'll be doing live interviews with some of your favorite developers, including Juliac and recently announced Miguel de Icaza. See hwroadtrip.com for more information on cities and dates. I was really glad to have Richard Hundhausen on the show. Richard is the president of Accentient, a company that helps software teams develop better products by leveraging ALM tools and Scrum. He's a professional Scrum trainer, author of Professional Scrum Development with Microsoft Visual Studio, and co-creator of the Scaled Professional Scrum framework. As a software developer and consultant with over 30 years' experience, he understands that software is built and delivered by people, not by processes and tools. I quite like Richard's story because it started way before having a computer as a kid. In fact, Richard's first experience with a computer was quite a bit later in his 20s. Really taught me that developers don't have to necessarily be born out of the womb with a keyboard at their fingers and still end up as great developers. Let's take a listen. Welcome, Boise! I've never been to Idaho before.
Welcome to Idaho. Glad to have you here.
My impression of Idaho has always been about potatoes, but it feels sort of weird to say that. What else is Idaho known for?
Idaho's known for a few things. We're the state that's shaped like a gun.
You are shaped like a gun?
Yep. We are the last state in the union to have Wi-Fi.
Oh, really?
Yep. We're looking forward to, I think next week we get it.
You get Wi-Fi also?
Yeah, I got to double check that, but...
I hear 2G's coming, which is nice.
2G, yes. 2G. Smoke signals. That's smoke signals, I think, still.
Yes, that's awesome. Well, Richard, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Sean. Thanks for having me.
I'm really excited about this. We almost worked together a bunch of times, if I remember right. At least that's how I remember our story.
We almost did. I think you're still in my Outlook recently used list.
That's how you know you've almost worked together. So as someone who is in the Scrum and Agile and in some respects the TFS space, that's a little bit different than a lot of the developers we've talked to. Do you think that, did you start your career differently than maybe a developer would? Did you have a computer at home when you were a kid?
No, I think I started like most everyone. I just had it shifted a few decades.
Decades?
Yeah. I saw my first computer in 76. I think it was a Radio Shack. Model 1, Level 1, 4K.
4K, wow.
4K, it's all you'll ever need.
You shouldn't need any more than 4K as far as I'm concerned.
But I didn't get to touch it until 6th grade. And then our school district got its own computer and everyone looked at it and said, what's this? I don't know. Let's go get that one kid that's interested in it and have him come down and start looking at it.
And what was that? Was that also the Radio Shacks? Or?
It was Radio Shack. That was a Level 2.
Ooh.
So I think it had 16K and still tape.
The whole tape thing I'm fascinated by because I had a tape on my VIC-20 and then on my Commodore 64. But when I tell that story, there's a percentage of the audience that we have to explain what a cassette tape is, right? Yes. It's not just that you could store computer stuff in it, but just, you've probably seen them around your parents' bedroom, probably have a couple left of the Doobie Brothers or...
Could be, yeah. It's hard to explain tape to someone that maybe has grown up in the CD and digital world, but... I'll let you try.
It's a strange thing because magnetic tape, and it would always get caught, so you'd need a pencil to rewind it, which is always fun.
Yep, had to use the pencil a few times.
And make sure it stayed flat. I remember flattening the tape when it got caught a couple of times because that magnetic head would grab it sometimes, the static electricity.
And with the Radio Shack recorders, there was a standard cassette recorder. You could unplug the wires and play it back and just listen to it and be impressed by the symphony of noises.
And that I remember the noises being vaguely similar to the carrier for the modem much later. I remember there being some, it's still data being played through sound.
Make a good ringtone, I think, if we could find that for our phones these days.
I've actually heard that a couple of times with that ringtone. So, were you passionate about it then, or was it just a toy for?
It was more than a toy. It was a toy that I could make it do what I wanted. So I taught myself BASIC, and wrote some really cheesy programs that just looped through things. And then being a gamer, right, a role play gamer. Anybody here? Dungeons and Dragons.
Dungeons and Dragons.
All right, GURPS.
Nerds.
So, like a lot of gamers, we needed something to roll up our characters, and we needed something to roll up the monsters. So I built apps that would generate NPCs and the nasty things we'd fight. And that was kind of my first apps,
I think that's every D&D computer guy's first app is, and if we knew how badly the random number generators were back then, we would have never used it, right?
That's right. Yeah, the Pentium 2s really sorted that out.
And so you started working with BASIC. As you're sort of formative in that, did that really tell you this is what I want to do for a living, or? Yes,
absolutely. When I was like 11 years old, I said, I don't know how I'm going to make a living with snakes, because that was what I was going to do before then. So I looked up what a herpetologist did, and it was interesting, but I don't know how to get a paycheck for it.
That's true.
So my dad was like, well, what you need to do is buy houses and remodel them and sell them for more than you bought them. And that was the guidance from my dad. And that was too hard of work.
That is a lot of work, at least from the flip shows I watch on HDTV or whatever it's called in every hotel room during the trip. And so did you go to college here in Idaho, or because you're from Idaho? Right?
I grew up in Twin Falls, south of here, about an hour and a half or so.
Oh, okay.
It's where Evel Knievel tried to jump the canyon back in the early 70s.
And right?
Failed.
Is that the Snake River?
That is the Snake River, yeah.
Snake River.
Very good.
Evel Knievel was a crazy guy who liked to jump motorcycles for the young ones in the crowd.
He'd like to crash them too, and that made for a good video.
Yes, yeah. Where what was it? The Wide World of Sports was the closest thing we had to YouTube. I remember
it was.
Every Saturday I'd watch it, and in hopes of someone crashing doing something, skiing, cars, whatever it was.
Well, it was always that poor guy coming down the ski jump that sort of ate it at the last second and took out all the signs. He was like their poster child.
It was part of that beginning sequence, and I always felt bad that that is what he's known for just eating it badly.
Exactly. That poor guy. He's probably not even around anymore with that lifestyle.
I'm pretty sure he died during the jump.
Ouch.
They just showed us a death every week. So growing up in Idaho, you had these computers at school. Did you end up going for a computer science degree, or did you start working? Or
so I saved up some money and I bought my own computer in '83. It was a Radio Shack Model 3 at that point, so it was kind of the all-in-one. Still couldn't afford floppies. They were too expensive.
But you got the full 48K, was it?
Nope, still 16.
Still 16,
tape-driven, but I was able to now, build apps and do things at my own leisure, not just when the school said I could do it.
Yeah.
And then I built a couple apps on the IBM PC XT.
The XT?
The XT had a hard drive. The AT had a hard drive and a little faster processor.
But the XT was a lot cheaper, if I remember.
The XT was cheaper, and it was first, and there were some people in the neighborhood that had an XT that I could, once the word got out that I could make computers do things and fix them and plug them in, then I could trade programming time for, free work, kind of like the Azure model today, just without the credit card. I was just looking to get compute time on these nicer machines.
Yeah. Yeah. And were you still doing BASIC on the XT?
BASIC, but then I got a hold of something called Turbo Pascal 3.0.
Turbo Pascal. Yeah. That's a very fond memory for many of us.
So I'll ask a question to you. What does Turbo Pascal, Delphi, and C# have in common?
I'm pretty sure it's the author of the languages.
Correct. So I tell people that I kind of followed Anders.
You have.
From Borland to Microsoft. Although I don't use TypeScript.
You should.
I should. Okay, I should.
Yeah. If you're doing JavaScript.
Make a note to myself.
Whatever Anders is into, I'm going to follow. I'm with you on that. So you started looking at Turbo Pascal, and this was mostly on the XT?
Yep, on the XT. I think maybe by then I had some more friends with ATs at that point, so I was able to, compile a little faster.
And if I remember right, the Pascal compiler came with this fleet of books.
Yes, literally a fleet.
Yeah, it was this, 3 feet long. There were discs in the front and then just all these books on the language.
And I think the first book was an instruction guide on how to read the books. How to assemble them and read them so that it made sense.
That's funny. And in doing these little things, were you writing pieces of software for the neighbors that actually did stuff that was useful for them? Or
Yep. So my first app that I actually got paid for was in '83. And it was just a little app to track triathlon there that ran in Twin Falls. It was just
nice. You
track in the 3 different events and the times and show who was leading in each category and then sort of summed it up by brackets at the end. And I think I was paid like $50 for it or something.
Wow.
Which was awesome when you're 15 years old.
Yeah, $50 goes a long way when you're 15.
It's like 200 games of Donkey Kong.
I do. I remember budgeting enough quarters for Centipede. There was a gaming store near where I lived called The Complete Strategist that had,
I remember that store.
I would go and say, okay, I'm going to buy this D&D little pamphlet and this with my allowance, and then I'd make sure I'd leave like 6 quarters for Centipede at the end of the day.
So you were a Centipede player?
I was. The rollerball, because you couldn't play other game. You could play most games on the Atari 2600, but the Centipede needed the rollerball, and there was no home console that had that.
No. Correct. Yeah, so you had to play that at the arcade or buy that expensive device.
Yeah, I never had that kind of money. So you were doing these little jobs. How did this turn into like your first honest to God job, or did that turn into college?
So in '84, Wendy's decided to build a restaurant in Twin Falls. Wendy's.
Wendy's.
Do you remember Wendy's?
I do.
Okay. So I thought that's the job for me. I can work at Wendy's and I can meet girls. Because I was, at the time where I wanted to not be the geeky kid in my mom's basement and get out and meet people.
Absolutely.
And they stuck me on the grill, which you can't really see from the window or the counter. I didn't meet anybody.
It foiled your entire
I never
plan.
got paid. There was a problem with the system, so I worked for 6 weeks and quit.
And never got paid.
And then I went and started writing software for a laboratory in town. Yeah, making good money, so I didn't miss my 6 weeks at Wendy's.
I remember my first job being minimum wage, which was $4.25 in those days. You can kind of figure out my age from that. And I could not imagine making any more money than that. It was more money than I had ever seen. 40 hours at $4 an hour, even after taxes, was, oh my God. Of course, I was living at home and my car was paid off. So that's exactly what it sounds like. So you started writing these pieces of software for labs, and were you working with other people, or was it just you in a room?
Just me in a room, and this was my first side seeing the effect of software in that they had like 10 typists that they were able to let go because my software was able to do all the math and print things out on the tractor-fed paper in triplicate.
Wow.
So I started seeing, wow, I'm causing those people to not have jobs anymore. But I was 17, I didn't care.
Right.
Yeah.
And in Twin Falls, I bet, there wasn't a ton of opportunity.
No.
Period. So any job was a good job.
Exactly. So, but there was no software jobs. I mean, back in those days, if you wanted software written, you'd go to talk to your accountant.
Right.
CPAs seem to have kind of the corner on the Ashton Tate DBase, table-driven reporting software.
Just a glorified programming language over Excel,
that's
right?
It.
I mean, that's what it most apps looked like those days.
Fox Pro.
Were you a Fox Pro guy?
Fox Pro guy, yes. Clipper too.
Clipper. I spent a long time in Clipper. I loved Clipper until computers.
Clipper? Anybody out there? Clipper?
Developers?
Yeah.
Nice.
Hey, where's your lighters? Hold up the lighters like we're at a Clipper conference.
Who's upset that CA bought Clipper still? Really? No one remembers that? That was a
Visual
dark
Objects?
day. I did Visual Objects. I did an entire actual project in Visual Objects, and I am scarred to this day because of it.
Man.
That's crazy. So how did you move from sort of the Pascal to the database, Fox Pro and all this other stuff?
In '89, I decided I didn't want to live in Twin Falls anymore, so I looked at the paper remember back then there wasn't Craigslist or Dice or anything. There was paper. I'm like,
jobs were printed on paper with phone numbers on them, right?
In classified sections of newspapers, and I responded to a job with the state of Idaho, so I came up for an interview, and I didn't make it because I didn't have a degree, and I was like, I don't know, 18 or something like that.
Yeah.
But a year later, some other jobs came open, and I was able to get one at the Department of Agriculture here.
Nice.
And there I was doing a lot of Clipper and, forms over data stuff.
Yeah, which is the core of most development back then. I mean, it still is.
It is.
But even more so back then. And did you find yourself working in teams at any point during that, or was it still
smaller teams, but a lot of co-location with the customer and building apps right with them, not just hand me some document and I'll go build it and give it to you, and you tell me that's not what you wanted. It's more, come sit down with me and we'll build it together, so I saw the value in that right off the bat.
So you were iterating before iterating was cool, right?
And collaborating and not preferring process and tools before that was cool too.
Yeah. I remember my first set of case tools was very scary. Really, there's a piece of software that I'll put in the requirements and the software will build more software. And of course, it never really worked.
No, but you bought the tool.
Right.
So that did work from their point of view.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So as you started working with teams, was there a different dynamic? I mean, you sort of started with just you and a blank screen, and now you're having to collaborate.
Yeah, definitely a different dynamic. And, I realized that it's not tools and process that build software, it's people.
Right.
And people have good days and bad days, and they're, fast people and slow people to do these things. So you had to kind of talk to people and be social about it and, collaborate. And that, for me, that was kind of hard because up until then I'd been the one-man show, and I could move at my own speed and enjoyed that.
And did you like the idea of the way computers work because you thought it might be more solitary?
Maybe, yeah.
I mean, when I started, there was certainly an allure of people are difficult, computers I can make sense of. And so it took me probably 10 years to figure out that half of software development is people. There's half of it that's actually writing code, but it's a people business, because whether you're in a company working with, internal people that need a software, or you're selling something to the people, understanding requirements and going through iteration cycles requires a lot of time with these things that at the time I was super uncomfortable with, which was other people.
That's a fair assessment. I think I was in the same boat. And I think about then was when the internet started to get popular. And, so you're collaborating with people online as well. One of the problems with even Boise was when I was doing Delphi development back then, or Visual Fox or Clipper, we didn't really have a support contract with those vendors. Right. And, a CompuServe account only took you so far.
Do you remember your CompuServe number?
72450, 2206.
That's awesome. That's a rare person who remembers their CompuServe number.
Yep. I don't think it directs anymore, but
it doesn't. I tried mine. That's funny.
So I ended up starting the first Delphi user group pretty much in the country. I still have Delphi.org as the domain, just so I could get other Delphi geeks out of the woodwork and we could solve each other's problems every month.
Was that here in Boise?
That's here in Boise, yeah.
Wow.
About 92, 93.
And so you gave a lot of talks on how to use all 16 colors of the palette, every form?
16 colors, yes. Preferring black and white, of course, but yes. Right.
That's my favorite thing about Delphi apps is you could finally use color easily, and so everyone did.
And Delphi was written in Delphi. That was always one of their selling points.
Which is awesome. I'm
not sure why, but it just sounds cool.
It does. Well, the C# compiler is written in C#, so
that sounds cool too.
It does. Chicken and egg problem though, but and so what I know you from is more sort of development process. How do you go from doing forms over data to the kinds of things you do today?
So in about 91, I'd been coding for 10 years. I'm like, I'm going to start teaching. So I responded to another ad in the paper to be a technical trainer here in town, teaching the oddball class, Paradox, D-Base,
Paradox. That's
Fox
a name
Base,
from the
Clarion,
past.
all those weird ones.
Yeah.
And it was kind of fun. I like, hey, I don't have to. When it's 5:00, I can go home. There's no wait, it broke.
There's no one more thing.
One more thing, yes.
Yeah.
You're always done on time and things like that. So I would work my day job. I would teach the occasional class, and I sort of left the state, did a contract with Idaho Power, and then just went to training full time.
Nice.
This was about 97, 98. And then got into as a Microsoft certified trainer and started teaching, all the different ADO and RDO and DAO.
The whatever the database language was going to be this month, right?
Whatever Bill Vaughn told me to learn next.
Exactly. That's not a bad life choice to just follow Bill Vaughn.
Just follow Bill Vaughn and Rocky and Deborah. I was learning who all these people were back then, late 90s.
Absolutely.
Even Ted Pattison.
Ted Pattison.
Back when he was with Developmentor, he wrote a couple of books on mastering Visual Basic and DCOM and how the registry works and class IDs and GUIDs. And I'm like, this is great. In one chapter, he explained more to me than all of Microsoft's content combined.
Absolutely.
So,
absolutely.
One of the legends there, in my opinion.
I used to make people read the first chapter of Don Box's book on COM because it explained the why better than anything I'd ever read. Because it wasn't even about COM. It was about why COM exists. Yep. Everything else you could learn. The rest of the book is great, but that first chapter was so important when you brought procedural developers that, like us, who came from Clipper, why objects and COM and interfaces and all that mattered.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was good stuff.
Yeah. So you're doing all this training, and was it really about just this sort of stability of training, or did you feel like you had a calling to teach?
So I always felt I could connect with developers, having been one, and also, not looking at my shoes or their shoes when I talk to them, just being a little more social. So, but it's also hard because you can't just teach. You have to stop and consult.
Right.
And, get back into the code and learn this new thing. And if anything, this industry has taught me how to learn, how to learn
Absolutely.
the new things. And, you're never done learning. This week, you might know everything they're talking about at this whole conference. Next week, it all changes again.
It does. And actually, events like this, the Boise Code Camp, are amazing because even if you think you know everything that's going on in every room, everyone has this interesting perspective, right?
Exactly.
If you want to learn about machine learning or ADO.net, maybe? No, maybe not.
No.
There's something to learn because a lot of these people that are teaching it because they're passionate about it and because they've been in the trenches with it, which is what sort of excites me. There are some teachers who sort of learn the material that they need, and then these other people who just seem to just know it.
Yeah, and I want people that know it and can give opinions on what doesn't work well.
Absolutely.
So that I know what to waste or not waste time on learning.
Yeah, absolutely. And
so I was going to say, starting in the late 90s, I also started co-authoring.
Oh, nice.
So I co-authored a study guide on VB6 for the exams.
Oh, nice.
And then a buddy of mine, we wrote a couple books for Wiley on ADO.net and XML web services.
Oh, nice.
And then I thought, you know what? It's time to try out the big leagues. So I went to Microsoft Press and said, hey, can I write a book on Visual Studio 2003 Enterprise Architect Edition?
Oh, nice.
Because this was the expensive edition everybody bought, but nobody really knew what was in there. It was the most expensive, so we got it. Our MSDN subscription that came with it. So I wanted to write a book on it, the enterprise templates and, all of the different UML and the stuff. They just acquired Visio a couple of years earlier.
Right.
So some of that ORM tools that came out there. And I was kind of depressed because the editor there, Ben Ryan, said, no, we're not really interested in that book. How about a book on Visio?
Wow.
I'm like, I'm not thinking so.
No.
Any tool that can let you, model your code and landscape your backyard in the same package
it may not be the right
thing. So
is it sad that the only thing I use Visio for is to lay out furniture in my house?
No, I think it's great for that.
It's awesome. But that's kind of where it ends.
And then he came back and said, well, hold on a second. I just learned about something called Codename Burton.
I don't even know what that code name is.
So 2004, Codename Burton, like Burton Snowboards.
Yeah.
Was what ended up becoming VSTS, Visual Studio Team System. And I'm like, wow, so this is the new source safe. And that was my first thought. And it was not the new source safe. It was this work item tracking and automated builds and all of this stuff. And back then it wasn't even ALM yet. It was SDLC.
And what does that stand for?
Software Development Lifecycle.
Oh, yeah.
But that was a little too narrow. That was just kind of the coding and testing part of it.
Right.
And then quickly, I think in 2008, maybe 10, they went from SDLC to ALM.
Right.
And ALM is everything from the vision of the app all the way through to sunset or being acquired by Google or whatever the end game looks like. And
right.
All the iterations in between. And I realized that a big part of that was the process. And about 2001, the agile processes were getting formalized at a ski resort south of here. So that was very interesting to me, is this whole agile movement. And I was an XP nerd already. And
oh, cool.
Yeah. So that kind of all came together for me then.
Yeah, because Uncle Bob just did this sort of 15 years later retrospective blog post that I found very interesting, sort of the things that worked and didn't work. But you were able to look at this tool. Were you basically writing a book based on the new bits that you hadn't seen yet? Like, did you agree, yeah, I'll write it, but can you give me a copy of the code first?
So yes, and this was back before they really did pre-releases. So I got a terminal server access.
Oh wow!
RAS access in, so I could play with the bits as they were being built and dropped. But even then, I'm like, I don't even know what I'm looking at or what's their intent behind here. Everything had code names of lighthouses off the shores of North Carolina, and there's a lot of backstory to why they hurried it out to the market that I wasn't aware of at the time. But I was also turned loose that said, yeah, go talk to whoever you need to. I'm like, well, who do I talk to? It's not really my job to find those people, but they're in building 25, they're in building 18, they're in,
Right.
So I found myself wandering around just trying to find people that I could bug, but not bug too much.
Right. There's that line. Oh, I do.
Working with Microsoft, you never ask the one person the same question twice or they'll not talk to you again. And
otherwise you'll never get the email will never get answered.
Exactly. So it was 6 weeks I wrote the book.
So you wrote a book in 6 weeks.
I had to, because by the time they signed the contract, I had to be done in 6 weeks so they could start editing it. And it took longer to edit it than it took to write it, so they could be ready for Tech Ed 2005.
Ouch.
Yeah, ouch.
Ouch.
The good news is it was a pre-release, a beta. Everybody got a copy of it at the conference that year. So it could be a little bit meh. Right.
But at the same time, but this wasn't the first book you had written. So
this is the first book I wrote all by myself.
All by yourself.
Yeah.
And that does make a difference.
It does make a difference. I couldn't blame anybody else. Couldn't collaborate with anybody. But it was a good learning experience.
That's awesome. I wrote one of those certification books a long time ago from Microsoft, and I haven't talked about this before, but it's kind of, hopefully it's interesting. There's a little blurb in the beginning of the books when you co-author these books about the author, and you're supposed to sort of in first person say, I'm this, I've done this is why I'm writing this book. And I wrote, I've literally written hundreds of lines of code in my life. That's one of the phrases that's in my little blurb. And no one caught it. No one caught the missing word of thousands, hundreds of thousands of lines of code. So this went to print, and for many years after that, people would come up to me at conferences wanting to take pictures with me as the hundreds of lines of code guy. It's not what you want to be known for in this industry.
Brian's dashing out to tweet that right now, I think.
That's a good call. It's a good call. I only found out because I was doing a search on something and I found my name and hundreds of lines of code. I was like, what the heck? And people were complaining on a forum about the reason why the book was so bad was because I had only written 100 lines of code.
You don't know about the website?
No.
Hundredsoflinesofcode.com.
Oh, no.
Someone grab that real quick, will you? We'll build that as a workshop tomorrow.
As an homage.
Yes, homage.
That's awesome.
So I was able to thank the city of Boise in the foreword.
Oh, wow.
For not having a 24-hour divorce court. Because it is trying to write a book, married, and balance everything.
It is. I made it my policy when I write a book to almost always thank my partner, my wife, whatever I have at the moment. And because it's always harder on them than it is on us in many ways. Because I don't know if you had kids at the time, that makes it harder. But even if not, you're not present at all, especially 6 weeks. That's insane.
That was insane.
I'm very impressed.
Now, once the bits dropped and it RTM'd, I was able to spend about 2 or 3 months to actually bring it up to RTM.
Right.
And there it sat. And it was, I think, still it was the first book on VSTS, Visual Studio Team System.
That's awesome.
And I think the most popular of any of them because it was first.
Right.
But I got a lot of things wrong in there. I was not the agilist I am today. So, I would talk tools first as a solution instead of people first.
Right.
So my last book, which I wrote in 2012, is Professional Scrum Development using Visual Studio. And I was just the opposite. I'm like, I don't know how Microsoft published that book.
Right.
Because I would say things in there like, hey, the shiny code review tools. Hey, the awesome, stakeholder feedback tools. Hey, the PowerPoint storyboarding tools. Yeah, don't use them. Get together with people and have a conversation at a whiteboard instead. Exactly. They let it go through.
Well, I think sometimes they don't know either, right? I mean, that's certainly because you wrote it, in 2005? A lot of the stuff was still evolving. We're an industry of technologists, and so our instinct is to solve it with technology, right? I think we were actually talking earlier about this, that having developers take psychology courses might not be a bad idea to learn how to deal, because we deal so much with people, especially when you're dealing with these short cycles or iteration or how do you handle a stand-up meeting where everyone goes, I'm fine.
Yeah, nothing's blocking me. I'm good.
Yeah,
I got stuff to do.
I worked on a project, I don't know how many years ago, but a bunch of our team was in India, and we were doing voice stand-ups every morning, and they never had a problem that was blocking them.
Oh, no.
And I'm like, there has to be something wrong, and then the build would break and all this other stuff. And we moved it to a text stand-up where we just use Skype and people would actually write it out. And that's where I learned, they're more comfortable with writing English than they are speaking English. And that solved everything. They were suddenly a font of, let's solve all these problems. But because they were worried about their English, and that's not a technical, how do you learn that by learning that, right? It's that stuff that I think is important. And you probably go through this all the time with your clients.
So I think I just heard you said that tools solved your people problem.
That isn't really what I was saying, but... Our people problem was me, but
you can be dispersed over geography, time, culture.
Yeah.
And I talk about this coefficient of friction. If you can get the same culture into the same room, same time, in a cross-functional team that's long-lived, so that you can build up some trust and you can build up some courage across the team, I call that a 0.0 coefficient of friction.
Nice.
Now, that doesn't always work because organizations are like, no, our team needs to be split up half here, half there. Okay, now we're at 0.5.
Right.
Oh, wait, well, these guys are going to work, mornings, these guys are going to work afternoons. Okay, we're at 1.1 now.
Right.
And until you can get back down to no friction, who knows what you're capable of.
Yeah. Because until you can work without any of those hindrances, that's always going to be, you've probably done this where you've done on-site training at a company, which I never recommend because half the room gets pulled out because everything's an emergency. you're paying me good money to teach these guys, and then you're pulling them out of the room. It doesn't,
It happens a lot, yes.
Yeah.
So, I was actually on site at a private company in Denver doing a class last week, and that didn't come up, but we talked about that. And what I recommend doing is, hey, your Scrum Master, your coach, or whoever kind of cares about these things should figure out what it costs. What's it cost to run your team for a sprint?
Yeah.
What's your run rate? And if it's, let's say, $30,000 for 2 weeks, then you can do the math. Okay, that's $15,000 a week. That's $3,000 a day. So as the team's down for a day with those kinds of issues or whatever, getting pulled off something, they can start putting a dollar amount to that. And then over time say, wow, we're wasting a lot of money. But no one ever does that. Because
no one thinks about it in terms of money. This happens actually in developer tools as well. When someone goes, oh my God, Xamarin's a good example of this, right? For the independent developer, Xamarin's very expensive. But when you think of what you're getting out of the box with any tool, even at $4,000, what is that? That's a week of developer time? No one could possibly build a grid in a week or any of this stuff. That those sort of tools end up being incredibly cheap. But people don't think of developer time as dollars. And I love this approach. I love this idea of how long does it take.
It helps. It helps if there's some dysfunction that just can't be removed. Just put a dollar amount on it so that the right people can say, well, what's this $70,000 line item here? Oh, that's just what your, product managers are wasting of the team's time by doing this every sprint.
Right.
Oh, wow. Let's not do that anymore. Because another developer, we could hire a tester or whatever.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for being on the show.
I'm happy to. Yeah, it's been nice.
Yeah, I love your story. It's not at all what I imagined, to be perfectly honest.
So what did you imagine?
For some reason, I imagined you coming out of the military. Isn't that odd?
I did work with the military for a couple of years in Germany. That's where I worked on a very dysfunctional team, where it wasn't about getting the product out the door. It was about stalling and turf building.
Of course.
Yeah. Let's don't be so fast. Don't be so efficient. Drag our feet. We can extend the contract, get a couple more bodies in here. I'm like, no, I don't do that. I don't play those games.
No. And who wants to be on that, right? You really want me to work slowly? My
wife, God bless her, she would say, I'd come home at night and she'd say, we're not here for that job. We're here to live in Europe. So get in your happy place and then let's talk about where we're going to go this weekend.
I think that's a good call. Your wife, I'm starting to believe, is a very bright woman. Except for the part that she didn't leave you when you wrote the book.
Yes.
Other than that part.
So here's my wife. I'll be off at some conference hanging out with guys like you. I'll come home and say, this is awesome. Microsoft just bought Xamarin and I was hanging out with all these thought leaders and guys and there's all this, cool stuff going on. And she'll there's a dead fish in the pond and this baby needs changed. I'm very happy that you're happy, but back to reality.
Back to reality. Wow. That's a sobering thought on the end of this, but I appreciate you bringing us down in the end. I appreciate it.
That's my gift.
That is a gift. Well, thanks again, and we'll be hearing from you, I'm sure, soon on whatever you're working on next.
Great. Thanks, Sean.
Thanks. Thanks for listening to the Hello World Podcast. Remember, you can subscribe to the Hello World Podcast at